This whole Luka MVP story gets serious the moment people start saying the reason he cannot win has nothing to do with basketball and everything to do with power. That is the center of this conversation. Not whether Luka is playing well, because he clearly is. Not whether he looks like an MVP-level player, because he clearly does. The real issue is this claim that forces people to stop and think. If Luka is putting up huge numbers, lifting the team, controlling games, and doing everything an MVP is supposed to do, then why does it still feel like his name is not being pushed the way it should be? And once that question gets asked, the next part hits even harder. Is there something going on behind the scenes to make sure Luka never becomes a bigger story than LeBron? That is the claim that exploded once Craig Carton said Luka has no real chance to win MVP if he reaches the games needed because LeBron James and Klutch Sports would never allow it to happen. That is a huge accusation. That is not normal sports talk. That is not just saying one player deserves more attention than another. That is saying there is a machine around LeBron that is strong enough, loud enough, and connected enough to shape the whole race. And if you hear that for the first time, of course it sounds wild. It sounds like something people would laugh at. It sounds like one of those sports theories that is too messy and too dramatic to believe. But then you sit with it for a minute, and that is when it starts to get uncomfortable. Because the question is not whether the claim sounds crazy. The question is whether people believe it sounds possible. And that is a very different thing. In sports, fans can accept almost anything if they believe power is involved. They have seen stars get protected before. They have seen narratives get pushed before. They have seen media voices suddenly line up around one message before. So when someone says Luka may not be allowed to fully enter the MVP race because it would hurt LeBron's image, some people do not laugh it off. Some people say, wait a minute. That actually fits the way modern sports works. It fits the way branding works. It fits the way media power works. It fits the way some big names get handled with extra care. And that is why this story got so much attention so fast. Luka is not just having a good year. He is having the kind of season that should force his name into every serious MVP talk. He is scoring big. He is creating everything. He is carrying a huge load. He is doing the kind of hard offensive work that turns average nights into wins and close games into statements. When a player is doing that, the conversation should be easy. You either say he is in the race or you explain why he is not. But when the numbers are loud and the push still feels weak, fans start looking for another answer. They stop thinking it is about basketball and start.
If Luka is the most valuable player in the league and he is on the same team as LeBron, then what exactly does that make LeBron right now? That is where the claim starts to feel dangerous for LeBron's image, not because it would ruin his career. Nothing can ruin a career that great, but because it would change the way people talk about him in the present. It would force the world to admit that this is no longer LeBron's team in the old sense. It would force the spotlight onto Luka in a way that does not just help the team, but changes the whole story of who the Lakers really belong to now. And for a player whose image has always been tied to being the center of the action, that matters. It matters a lot. It changes the power picture. It changes the legacy talk. It changes the language people use when they discuss who is carrying who. This is why some people believe there would be real reason to slow that MVP push down if you were thinking from the LeBron side. Because if Luka wins the award, then all those old talking points start looking weaker. The LeBron needs more help talk goes quiet fast. The LeBron is still the main engine talk gets shaky. The everything still runs through him talk becomes hard to sell. Instead, the world starts saying something much simpler. Luka is the best player on this team right now, and the voters confirmed it. That is not a small change. That is a major shift in how the basketball world would see this whole Lakers chapter. Now, to be fair, there is a big difference between saying something helps a certain image and saying someone is actually pulling strings to make it happen. That is where the whole debate gets serious. Craig Carton made it sound like there is no world where LeBron and Klutch would allow Luka to win MVP. That is not just a guess. That is a direct accusation. That says media influence is being used like a weapon. That says the race is not just about voters watching basketball. That says the story is being shaped before the ballots are even filled out. And if that is true, it would be one of the clearest signs yet that the MVP race is not as clean as people want to believe. What makes fans take that idea more seriously is that this is not the first time people have talked about influence from powerful camps around stars. That is the part that keeps this from being just empty noise. Once people hear stories about media outreach, pressure, favor, and narrative building, they stop seeing these things as impossible. They start seeing them as part of the modern game. Not the game on the floor, but the game around the floor. The battle for image, the battle for stories, the battle for what fans are supposed to believe. And in that world, the biggest names always have more tools than everyone else. They have more reach, more allies, more coverage, and more protection. So when people bring up the old report that Klutch Sports pushed media voices toward LeBron in an MVP race, even while Anthony Davis was having a huge season, it changes how this whole Luka story sounds. Suddenly, the theory does not feel like it came out of nowhere. Suddenly, there is a reason some people think this stuff can happen. If a player's camp has ever tried to shape an award conversation before, then why would fans believe it could never happen again? Why would they believe Luka is safe from that kind of pushback if his rise creates a problem for LeBron's story? That is what makes this so messy. Once the trust is gone, every quiet move starts to look like part of a plan. And honestly, the timing makes the whole thing.
That is why every little detail becomes loaded. If he leads a team at this age, it helps his myth. If he adjusts into a lesser role and still wins, some people say that helps his myth too. If he plays next to a younger star and that younger star becomes the league MVP, then the conversation turns into something much harder to control. Because then people start asking whether LeBron is the hero of this chapter or simply a famous part of Luka's rise. That question matters because LeBron's story has always been protected through narrative control. Every all-time great gets some of that, but with LeBron it feels even bigger. There is always a reason, always a frame, always a talking point ready to explain what a moment means for him. That is not always evil. Sometimes it is just what happens when a player is that famous. But it also means people become suspicious. They start believing that nothing around him is random. They start believing that media praise is part of a system. And once that belief sets in, claims like this Luka MVP theory do not sound totally impossible anymore. They sound like another chapter in a bigger pattern. The hard part is that Luka himself is the kind of player who should be impossible to hide. He's too good. He's too productive. He's too central to winning. He controls games in a way that demands attention. He scores, passes, slows the game, speeds it up when needed, and bends whole defenses around his choices. This is not a role player looking for a nice story. This is a true lead star. This is a player who can carry a whole offense and make it look normal. So if someone like that still cannot get full MVP love while putting together an MVP season, then fans are naturally going to think something bigger is getting in the way. And maybe that is what bothers so many people. They do not just want Luka praised, they want fairness. They want the race to mean what it says. If the Most Valuable Player award is really about impact, importance, and top-level production, then fans want to see that standard used honestly. They do not want it bent based on brand value. They do not want it shaped by who has the biggest media army. They do not want it turned into another chapter of somebody else's legacy project. They want the player having the huge season to get a real shot. And if they feel that is not happening, they're going to get angry, especially when the player being held back is one of the few stars bold enough to stand beside LeBron without shrinking. That matters too. Luka is not just another teammate. He's not a soft second option. He's not somebody who naturally fades into the background. He plays like the floor is his. He shoots big. He controls the rhythm. He puts his own stamp on games. That is part of what makes him great, but it is also part of what makes him threatening to LeBron's image if you're thinking in pure legacy terms. Because once Luka becomes the clear center of the Lakers' basketball identity, the whole picture changes. Suddenly, LeBron is not the unquestioned lead story anymore. Suddenly, the future is not waiting politely. It's already here. And this is why people say an MVP for Luka would hit different.
It would not be just another award on a resume. It would be a statement. It would say that while LeBron is still famous, still great in ways, and still important, the real top force on that team now wears Luka's face. It would say the next chapter has already started. It would say the Lakers are not living in a LeBron world anymore. They're living in a new balance, maybe even a new order. And no matter how supportive LeBron may seem in public, fans understand how hard that shift can be for any aging superstar, especially one whose whole career has been built around being the center of every room. Now let's talk about the Jordan angle, because once people started linking Luka's possible MVP to LeBron's GOAT case, the debate became even hotter. The argument is simple. If LeBron is supposed to be the greatest ever, how does it look if his team...
That may not be fair, but sports debates are not built on fairness. They're built on easy pictures. And the easy picture would be this. Jordan was the clear number one on title teams, while LeBron at this stage is standing beside the MVP and trying to ride the wave. That is why some people think the image of Luka winning MVP would create real damage in the endless Jordan-LeBron war. Again, not damage to LeBron's full career, because that is already locked in, but damage to the way his supporters want to sell the current chapter. It would become harder to say he is still the main force when the award says otherwise. It would become harder to use team success as proof of his total control when the biggest individual prize goes to the guy next to him. And because the GOAT debate is always alive, always loud, and always emotional, people believed there would be strong reason for LeBron's side to avoid that picture if they could. The problem is that this is where the theory becomes both strong and weak at the same time. It is strong because the motive makes sense to some people. It is weak because proving that behind-the-scenes influence actually changed MVP voting is very hard. Fans can believe it, analysts can hint at it, but unless somebody brings real proof to the table, it stays in the space between possibility and suspicion. That is an important line, because if you cross that line without proof, you are not just telling a story, you are accusing powerful people of manipulating one of the league's biggest awards. That is why this topic feels so explosive. It sits right between what many fans believe could happen and what nobody can fully prove did happen. Still, even without proof, the idea itself tells you a lot about how people see LeBron and Klutch now. They do not just see them as part of the basketball world. They see them as power players. They see them as people who can shape coverage, guide stories, and build influence far beyond the court. That image did not come from nowhere. It came from years of seeing how strong the LeBron machine is. It came from watching how quickly media conversations move around him. It came from seeing how many people defend, explain, or push his side of things at all times. Whether that's fair or unfair, that is the image. And once that image exists, every big award race around his team becomes open to suspicion. Luka's own style adds fuel to this, because he is not easy to put into someone else's shadow. He takes up too much space with his game. He makes too many winning plays. He puts up too many huge stat lines. He is too obvious. If this were a quieter player, maybe the conversation would not grow so loud. But Luka is the kind of player who makes people ask why he is not being celebrated even more. He forces the issue. He makes it harder to ignore what is right in front of you. That is why every weak MVP push around him feels strange. It feels forced. It feels like someone is trying to keep the volume lower than it should be. And then there's the emotional part of all this. Some fans don't even care whether the theory is fully true. To them, it feels true because it matches what they already believe about LeBron's career. They believe he has always had more help, more protection, and more narrative control than other stars. They believe too many people around him work to protect his image at all costs. So when they hear that Luka may be getting blocked from full MVP respect because it would make LeBron look bad, they don't need proof to feel it in their gut. They say, of course, that is how this works. That is how it has always worked. Whether that is right or wrong, that feeling is powerful, and once fans feel that strongly, the theory takes on a life of its own. At the same time, there are plenty of people who hear this whole thing and think it is nonsense. They say LeBron and Klutch cannot control the voters like that. They say the media is too wide, too messy, and too divided for one camp to fully own an MVP race.
They say Luka's case will rise or fall based on games, wins, record, and what the voters think matters most. And that is a fair answer, too. Not every strange result comes from a plot. Not every weak push comes from hidden hands. Sometimes awards are just messy.
Sometimes voters are inconsistent. Sometimes media people stick to old ideas. So yes, there is room to say this theory goes too far. But even if the theory is too far, the fact that so many people find it believable tells you something real. It tells you trust is low. It tells you people no longer look at these awards as pure reflections of basketball. They see brand battles, image battles, and media games. They see power working in quiet ways. And because they see that, they are more willing than ever to believe a player like Luka could be kept from full MVP love if his rise creates a problem for a bigger legacy machine. That is what this story really exposes. Not just a possible plot, but a deep lack of faith in how the league's biggest narratives are made. And the wild part is that this whole thing may say as much about LeBron's stage of career as it does about Luka. Because if Luka winning MVP next to LeBron creates this much tension in people's minds, that means everyone already knows the balance has shifted. Everyone already feels the truth underneath it. Luka is not just another talented teammate. He is strong enough to change the meaning of the team. He is strong enough to change the meaning of LeBron's role. He is strong enough to turn LeBron from the center of the story into one part of a bigger story. And if that change is already visible, then the fear of an MVP only makes more sense. So in the end, this is why the accusation landed so hard. It is not just because Craig Carton said something wild. It is because his words connected to a fear many fans already had. The fear that once Luka gets too close to a major award, the LeBron machine will quietly step in and cool it down. Maybe through media pressure, maybe through story shaping, maybe through the simple power of having too many connected voices in the room. Again, that is still a theory, but it is a theory that grows because the conditions around it feel believable to so many people. And that is what makes this such a powerful basketball story. Not just the award race, not just Luka's numbers, not just LeBron's image, but the clash between rising power and old power, between a younger star who should be impossible to deny and an older legend whose brand is too big to let anything happen without questions following it. Luka winning MVP would not just be about Luka. It would say something about LeBron. It would say something about the Lakers. It would say something about who this team really belongs to now. That is why the tension is real, whether the conspiracy is real or not. Because deep down, everybody understands what an MVP would mean here. It would mean Luka is no longer just sharing the stage. It would mean he owns the stage. It would mean the basketball world has officially moved its eyes from LeBron to the guy standing next to him. And if you believe LeBron and Klutch care deeply about how every chapter of his story is told, then you can understand why some fans think they would never want that picture to become official. That is the heart of the accusation. Not just that Luka might be blocked, but that his rise means too much to too many other stories for people not to try. So whether you believe the theory or not, one thing is clear. This Luka MVP conversation is not just about stats anymore. It's about trust, power, image, and who gets to control the story when two huge names stand on the same team. And until Luka either gets the full MVP push he deserves or gets clearly pushed aside again, this question is not going anywhere. Because once people start believing awards can be shaped about power, every silence means something, every weak narrative means something, and every missing vote feels like part of a bigger game. And right now, for a lot of fans, that bigger game has LeBron and Klutch written all over it.